ELD Standards Framework, the launching webinar. My name is Julie Duffield and I'm helping with tech support. This Region 15 Comprehensive Center is a federally funded grant that helps provide technical assistance to the 4 state regions, of which Nevada is a part of that region. So your mic is on mute. It was muted when you entered. So the chat will be where you can type in questions, ideas, and resources. And as I said, we have staff that are moderating, and we'll let the presenter know about your questions as we go along. I'm now happy to hand it over to my colleague, Pam Spiescher, to begin the proceedings. Pam, over to you.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see everyone here, and I hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. I am Pam Spiescher, as Julie mentioned, from the Region 15 Comprehensive Center, and I, along with my colleagues, Rachel Lagunoff and Haiwen Chu, who maybe they can give a wave, say a little hello. We have been working closely with Dr. Sofia Misavich and Dr. Kulwadi Axtel to bring this webinar to you to launch the ELD Standards Framework. And I'm going to just hand things over to Dr. Misavich and Dr. Axtel so they can share with you this wonderful ELD Standards Framework, which they have been working tirelessly to bring to Nevada educators. So over to you, Dr. Misavich and Dr. Axtel.
Well, thank you, Pam. So what I'd like to say before we begin, really introducing the ELD Standards Framework. This is a great celebration. It's hard work from a number of educators from across the state who developed the ELD Standards Framework. And so this is an introduction. This is the initial rollout. This is the formal rollout and celebration of the ELD Standards Framework. So the purpose of this webinar is to introduce educators to the Nevada English Language Development Standards Framework, which includes the content instructional guidance document. And the ELD Standards Framework provides essential practices for teaching of English learners in the content area. These essential practices have instructional benefits for students who have not yet met proficiency in the academic language of the content discipline. So the ELD Standards Framework, and at the core of the document, provide clarity for the implementation and the successful integration of the ELD Standards Framework and the Nevada Academic Content Standards. So for educators, it becomes really clear the connection between the content standards, the content disciplinary practices, and the ELD Standards Framework. So this is the resource that we're rolling out to support educators in all content areas in the use of practices, best practices for English learners. The other thing I'd like to say in addition to this is that the framework has been aligned to the Nevada Educator Performance Framework standards to illustrate best practices for English learners and other student populations. So my colleague, I believe we're on the slide that talks about the purpose, and she will present some opening information in the next few slides. So, cool. Cool, you're on mute.
Thank you, Sophia. That was not my first time and not the last. Thank you. And as Sophia has stated, the purpose of the webinar today is to introduce you to the Nevada English Language Development Standards Framework and the Content Instructional Guidance Document. This is the introduction to the framework because please be patient with us. We will have deeper courses and deeper in different content or practices. We will keep adding that as resources to support content teacher, other instructional staff in implementing best practices for English learner and for other diverse learner who have not yet met academic language proficiency in the content area. Because we will know by the end, some of you probably think, oh, we need more, to more deeper discussion. Since we had some webinar last week, and we saw a lot of good feedback on that. So just want to let you know, as for your patient, this is the introduction to the framework, and we will add that later because we know this document is really important and beneficial for lesson planning, instruction delivery, curricular development, assessment practices, and also professional learning opportunities, so all of that. So just so you know, we will keep adding those sources. And the next slide I would like to talk about, for the next slide, I would like to talk about why we developed the ELD standard framework. For our state, we have, years ago, we adopted the VITA ELD standard framework. And our educators still need more deeper clarity of that standard, so they make appeals to the ELD, through English Master Council. So we respond to that educator request. And also, as you know, after Common Core standards have been introduced, the content standards, more rigorous assessment result by for student outcome had been set higher bar. So we see the need that the ELD standard framework need to be developed and created to support our teacher to address the need of our English learners. And we have developed four different content areas: math, science, social study, and English language art. They have been developed by our educators across state. They are English language specialists, content expert, and also classroom teachers, professional development trainers. We have some that in the position of the district administrator of English learner programs, and also representatives from higher education institutions. So we have all experts, both English learner specialists and content, who work together in those content area and organized by the grade level cluster. Sophia will show you later in our document. So the next slide, we will still talking about, why we developed the ELD standard framework. As we know that our educators are responsible for all students' education, including English learner. English learner do not belong to English learner specialists. So they are our students. So they must have access to rigorous standard-based instruction to be college and career ready. So on the slide here that's showing, we also would like to present that equity on how the ELD standard framework can be resources to support educators to provide English learner with their language development and also the content instruction that they need to be successful in those content area. So again, the student, the pillar of the nation, the equity that you have to believe in. So you implement that equity in the classroom. So we have a student to be successful and be ready for career path and the career readiness for all students. So the next slide that you will not disagree with me is the Tier 1 instruction effectiveness. As you know, most high-performing schools who have successful in their school have a very strong Tier 1 instruction. And our framework can provide that practices. So we have strong Tier 1 instruction for English learner and also other students who have not yet proficient in academic language and also the content discipline. So the next slide, I will turn over to my colleague to talk about the vision of the ELD standard framework. Go to you, Sophia. Thank you.
Yes, before,
Sophia,
yes.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to make sure you saw this. There was a question about if participants will be getting a copy of the slides to refer back to. And I'm wondering if you could just let us know about that.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Pam. Yes, the plan is certainly that those that are participating in this webinar will be sent the recording and that information, and we will also post this on Canvas.
Thank you.
So, okay, thank you for following up and checking the chat. I didn't see that. As we go on and talk about this, I think we always have to talk about what's the vision. And I think we can all share this vision around ensuring that English learners and other students are really taught by educators who hold them in with high standards and high expectations. And so the vision is that all students attend schools in which all educators share this responsibility for their success. So one of the things I think that certainly would be needed is that we would ensure that educators have the resources and the professional development that they need, the learning to advance the students' academic and linguistic development simultaneously. So these documents around how do we do that? What are the best practices? Because English learners cannot wait until they're proficient in the language. So given that, with the appropriate supports, English learners can also achieve both that language development continuously in progressing to proficiency within the content area. So our goal here with these documents is to really provide a resource in which teachers can use in their lesson planning, and also that we could use it in professional development. So let's move on to the next slide. Thank you. So in our next slide, what I'd like for you to do is, before we get into frameworks, is to respond in the chat. When I hear the word framework, I think of, if you would take a few minutes to do that. Well, we have some great ideas. I think of structure. I think of foundation. I think of guidelines. I think of scaffolding, framework. I hear support, a guide with flexibility. We have some wonderful responses in the chat. So thank you for that. So as we move forward, and please continue to add and others to read just the ideas around a framework. So let's kind of review for ourselves. We all know really what the Nevada ELD standards framework say, that we have 5 standards. And of course, we're talking about language. So English language learners communicate for social and instructional purposes within the school setting. And in standard 2, we really think of this as the language of language arts, the language of mathematics, the language of social studies, the language of science. So the focus really is on the language. So these are the standards. Now, what do we do with the standards? So let's move to the next slide. So on our next slide, before we get started, we want to take a short poll, and that poll would be on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest. Indicate your awareness of the ELD standards framework in the poll. So Judy, if you would pull up the poll, please. Julie.
Yeah, it's out there, and I hope you can see it, everyone. Let us know if you can't in the chat.
I'm seeing the poll on my end.
Okay, and I'm missing the poll.
Okay.
So Pam, as you see the poll, maybe you can comment on that because I cannot see the poll.
Yes, definitely. Yes. So what I'm seeing, I'll put my video on so I'm not this disembodied head. What I'm seeing is that most people seem to be falling in the a little aware to somewhat aware range. So 2 or a 3.
Okay.
That's the majority of people.
Hey, thank you so much. Thanks for responding to the poll, because I think it kind of gauges, the work that certainly you're aware of, and then how this work can be incorporated in what you're already doing. So in talking about the framework, so the framework really is the foundation, and it's around the language development. And within the framework, there are actually four frameworks. There is the framework for ELA, social studies, math, and science. And the framework really would be the general practices, but then we also move to the instructional guidance document that are specific for those 4 content areas. So let's take a look on our website. If we go to slide 14, this information, all of our guides. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So this comes from our NDE website in the Office of Student and School Support, OSSS, under English Language Learners. You will see and be able to access all of the ELD standards framework. The framework provides instructional guidance documents, and it's also organized around grade level clusters. For example, in ELA, you will see a framework specifically for grades 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10. And so teachers can actually go into these guides and look at some of the supports specifically for this grade range in terms of those scaffolds and practices.
And so,
right.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure that if some people are not looking at the chat, Haiwen has pasted the URL for the guidance documents in the chat in case you want to go take a peek yourself.
Yes, thank you. I think Julie, if you could just open up the math document, I just wanted people to see kind of the extent of the document. We're going to go through some components of it once we leave the website. But if you would do math grades 4, 5 for people to just take a peek, and we'll scroll kind of through the documents.
I think they should be showing now. Just give me a heads up if.
Okay, so thank you. I'm not able to see that, but that's okay.
I can't
looks like
see
it's a technology glitch for me.
I'm not seeing it either, Julie, just FYI.
Okay.
Did you take over the slideshow?
Oh, wonderful. We'll start here just to
Can you see it
scroll.
now,
Okay.
Pamela?
I believe I can see it if you can scroll back to the top. Hey, there we are. So
Great.
this, thank you so much.
Here we are.
Thank you. I think we are getting people to acknowledge that they see the documents. So the documents are constructed in the same structure. And if you can scroll pretty quickly, we will just take a glimpse of that. Thank you. Hey, these are really exciting documents because they are specific to the discipline. And as you know, as educators, we like things that really kind of speak to the work that we do and the grade level we do and in the subject areas that we do. So in the next, if you can keep scrolling down, we'll just see a little bit more. Here are some of the scaffolds. And as you can see, it's done by proficiency levels. Wonderful. Hey, we're going to take a peek at a couple of these. We're still going to use the math grades 4 and 5 as our example. So we're going to kind of move from the website. Thank you for your patience. And then we'll move back to the PowerPoint. And we'll go through some specific components of the ELD standards framework. Thank you. All right, I believe we're in the next.
You should see the slides now.
Yes, thank you so much. If you would go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what I like to point out now is the sample document, and we'll take a look again at the math grades 4 and 5. When what you see here is the table of contents. And then these are the components, the structure, the architect of these documents. So in in section 1, for example, these are the ELD standards framework for developing the language of math. You will see the purpose and the key uses of language, which I think many of you are familiar with from WIDA. So that's in section 1. Section 2 would be the standards framework for developing language of math, could be for social studies and those other content areas that we mentioned. This section provides the student moves, the language use expectations. These are the can-do descriptors, but they are descriptors specifically for that content area. So really the documents are focused on the supports provided for content teachers and all teachers. And so for this document, it really is about what students can do with supports in mathematics. And so it does, we do talk about receptive and productive language samples within this section. And then as we move forward, the next section is section 2B, which are the teacher moves that support students to process and to produce the language. And these are general supports that all teachers can use to help students to process and produce language. Section 2C would be the teacher moves that teachers can use for students, to help students to collaborate with their peers using the academic language. Section 3, really what I just spoke of, section 1 and 2, that is the framework that all teachers can use. Section 3 are the instructional guidance documents, and we're going to look at that in a few minutes. So let's go and look at some components of this. Let's move on to the next slide, please. So when we look at the parts of the framework itself, and we just mentioned the student moves, that these are the student expectations, what you can see that these are in the proficiency levels, level 1, 2, level 3, 4, and level 4, 5, 6. And so this is really critical for teachers to understand what language is not limited. These are samples students can do at those different proficiency levels. So that really helps us to understand the progression of language as students develop that academic language. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide, please, which will look at the ELD standards framework for teacher moves. And these are the supports that teachers can provide. These would be the practices and the strategies teachers can use to help students produce and process languages to make meaning of the content, to produce the language so it becomes observable. So we want to take a kind of a peek into some of this. So let's go to the next slide, please. So we're going to move into the next slide, I believe. And here's a sample. We just pulled out level 3-4, which was the
Showing
middle
on the
column.
screen.
Yes, we see it on the screen. Thank you. So this is, we pulled this out from the document itself. And so this is develop and expanding. This is the proficiency levels for level 3 and 4. So take a moment to look at that. These are the kinds of things that the documents will help teachers to think about in their lesson planning. So in the chat, if you would, which of these teacher moves are already in place? You know, that you observe, that you use, that teachers understand. If you would just share with us in the chat. Wow, we see some wonderful things. Graphic organizers, vocabulary, we have the word banks, the teacher model of academic language, okay, explicit instruction, full sentences, okay, provide anchor charts for students to refer. Well, great, wonderful. So through this example, what this document does is provide some of those supports, those practices and strategies that teachers can think about as they do their planning. So what is, when I look at level 3 and 4, what are some of those things that benefit students? And what you will notice would be that the practices become more intense in the first column for level 1 and 2 students, which might include things like simple sentence frames, starters, word banks, and more extensive and or less intense supports. For example, in column 3 for bridging it, which would be levels 5 and 6. And depending upon the task, that would determine the amount of scaffolding that would be needed, really across all students, because all students certainly can benefit from scaffolding when appropriate. So let's move on to the next slide, please, which would be 19. And what 19 does in our next slide.
Up there.
Yes, thank you so much. So what we're doing now is really looking at the framework itself. And this is the last component of the framework. And these are general teacher moves that support students to collaborate with their peers in the academic language. So I'm sure that if you look in the middle column again, you will recognize many of these practices to develop extended discourse for students to collaborate and learn and make sense certainly of the content. So the the slides that were previously presented are the slides for the framework itself and that all teachers can use. So let's move more targeted to the ELD standards instructional guidance documents. So this is the section 3. And these are the ELD standards guidance document, and they are organized around the disciplinary practices for the content. So as mentioned in the framework, there were 18 frameworks. So there's a framework for ELA, a framework for math, a framework for science, and a framework for social studies organized around the grade level clusters. So let's take a look in the next slide, an example of this from the math example that we were using. Next slide, please.
It's showing for me. I just want to make sure it's up there for you now too.
Yes, it is. Thank you. So remember, every content have disciplinary practices. And so for math, for example, there are 8 disciplinary practices. So the disciplinary practices, as mentioned before, is the entry point into the content standards. These would be the habits of, say, example mathematicians. So, you know, we talk to students about acting like a scientist, a historian. And so with the instructional guidance document, we enter through the disciplinary practices. And so this is practice 1, make sense of a problem and persevere in solving them. And so what this ELD instructional guidance document presents to teachers would be, what are those best practices for students to really exercise and engage in this thinking to make sense of problems and persevere. So we have practices, and we also have some sentence stems. And these sentence starters or stems are used to help teachers kind of construct the language. So what would that language look like? So there are scaffolds that you can see. The other thing I want you to notice about this is that we are connecting to the NEP standards. So when you see IP, the instructional practice 1.2, this will be standard 1, practice 2. I'm sorry, indicator 2, I apologize. Standard 1, indicator 2. So we have a document that we've developed where we've aligned the ELD standards framework to the NEPF. So the instructional guidance documents actually walks through each of the practices. And there are 2 sections. One would be, for example, practice 1B, make sense of the problem and persevere in solving them. And in the next slide, if you would move to the next slide, please. What we have next would be—
Should be up.
Yes, thank you. I can see it. I hope everyone else can. 2 parts to every practice. One is the practice itself with the supports that teachers can provide. The next part of the practice will give samples, a sample of the formative assessment. And the formative assessment is around the language and the content. So this we call the student success criteria. And that's the student success criteria for this particular practice. What should we see in language? It also builds in the supports so that students can actually perform the standards. So if you look just, if you look very closely at the center, the middle column, you can see, for example, I'm going to the second, the formative assessment is for students to state some specific and technical academic vocabulary in their explanations and justification of one of the preferred student strategies. So this was what the teacher was asking all students to do. And in the first column, there are several more supports for students at that level 1 and 2. And then there are limited supports for a student at level 5 and 6. But this will give teachers an idea of what they should hear in the language, and the content remains constant. The expectation for what students should do in the content is the same. What's different would be the scaffolding so that students can engage in the content. So we'll move to the next slide, and I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sophia, for the clear explanation on the document, and also walk us through the structure of document, what we have in instructional guidance document. So now we would like for you in the chat, please share your reflections on how you can apply the ELD standards framework in lesson planning, or maybe your thoughts on implication of the framework, for professional learning, or any questions you may have. So please take a few minutes and share with us in the chat, please. Thank you. Also, if you have any questions, just so you know, we collect the questions and we will have that in FAQs, and we will put that and respond to those questions and have that up on the website as well. Just so you know, we may not have time to respond to all the questions, but please keep your question and share with us in the chat. So we capture everything in there. Thank you.
So I see some great connections coming in.
Excellent.
So everyone, as you are reading the chat, it's so important that we connect this to the work that we have going on, and then to really expand what the possibilities are in terms of being very targeted for the work that we do, so that we can expand the academic proficiency of students, but also simultaneously develop their language.
Yeah, we have some that said that she has used that in her professional learning.
Thank you.
Nice to hear that and to see that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay.
Wow, that's all great. Thank you so much for that. Again, keep sharing that in there. We monitor and keep everything. So with the interest of time, we probably move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so so now we just would like to show you that the framework, the ELD standards framework, had applications in distant and hybrid learning environments. The example tools such as the one shown here, Flipgrid, Padlet, Zoom breakout section, or Google Classroom. These are tools that can be used to apply the scaffolding practices across the various language proficiency level and domains from the ELD standard framework. So the framework, as you have seen, an instructional guidance document provide best practices for educators to engage English learner in the use of academic language and to make meaning of the content area. So again, we see from the chat and although the feedback from other webinars that we conducted on the other day, we see a lot of interest and high demand at how our teacher would like to have more support. So we will, again, let you know and keep adding in those resources. Just as we shown here, for example, we have heard fifth grade is quite popular right now to use as a tool to apply all these ELD standard practices. So the next slide, Sophia will talk about how this can be connection to the ELD, the ELD standard framework, the connection to the NEPF. I think this one is, most of the educators would love this. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So we are working on the ELD standards framework and the Nevada Educator Performance Framework. In that alignment, we have finished the alignment, and we will be presenting a webinar soon on the NEPF. The intent is to provide what it looks like in the standard. So we've connected those practices, best practices for English learners, identified them in the 5 NEPF standards, and we are also gathering videos so that those practices can be observed and looked at through this video content, some of these short videos that will demonstrate the practice. So we'll do a webinar on that. In addition to that, many of you know about the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative that we have, and there are great resources there. We are working with our colleagues in that area to really build the ELD performance best practices within a digital format. And so we're gonna have videos that will show targeted best practices. So for example, if it's scaffolding, if it's meaning making, it's extended discourse, we are planning to work with the digital engineers that are in the Nevada Digital Learning Collaborative to really have this on-demand digital learning opportunities for educators. So look for that. We are building that out. We will continue to add resources to the NDE website, as I said, under OSSS, the Office of Student and School Supports, under English Language Learners. The content for this, of course, is going to land in Canvas. And as you know, that's our state LMS system. And so as we build out a deep dive into, let's say, Introductory 101 and 201 for a deeper dive, as we build out these courses and these short little videos, they will be housed in Canvas. So next slide. I just want to thank you for joining us today. It has been our excitement and pleasure to roll out the ELD standards framework, which represents the work of very dedicated educators from across the state to develop the documents. So here's our contact information. And I'm sure some of you know us, but definitely contact us with any further questions, any supports that you might need. We're here to help. And so I want to thank our partners, our consultants from West Ed, and also the technology team that helped to support us today in this website. So thank you.
Thank you, Sophia and Cool. We are so appreciative of all of the work you've done and of this wonderful celebration that we're seeing right now. Thank you everyone for being here today. We know you have a lot going on and we really appreciate you participating. We would love to hear your feedback on today's webinar, and we're posting the link to the survey in the chat, so take a look at that before you go. And thank you and have a wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you.